Now, Dave, the main topic. I've been waiting for this the whole episode.
Yeah, so, look, well, let's have some fun. We're going to put each of the first 8 Doctors into a new Who story, and we're going to end by saying a few new Who stories we just can't imagine a classic Doctor in.
Yes.
Very simple, but hopefully fun.
Yes, and we've had a few comments from listeners too, which we'll read at the end of this segment.
And did you find when you were doing this, Rob, some Doctors were really easy and there were multiple choices, and others you've really struggled to find a suitable one?
Yes, particularly because I found it very hard to pick one for the third Doctor. I really struggled. I looked up and down the list of stories for a long time before I slotted him in. But others I slotted in almost straight away, and then I'd see another story and think, oh, that could be one for him as well. Oh, there's another one. Oh, he could be in everything, you know? And so, yeah, some did seem very easy. Some had multiples. Not that I'm going to do multiples here, but yeah, Pertwee for me was so tricky.
Oh, interesting, because he was the first one that I did. I've just gone, Pertwee goes in there, done.
Oh, yeah, look, when I found something for him, I thought, well, that fits, and that's the Pert, you know, he would do well. But it took me a while to find it.
Okay, so do you want to go first or shall I?
We could toss a coin, Dave.
Oh, I have a coin right here, so we are live tossing a coin. Heads or tails, Rob?
Tails.
It's heads, so I guess I'm going first.
That's you.
So, Hartnell. I've decided to put Hartnell, accompanied by Vicky, into the Eaters of Light.
Oh, wow, okay.
Because, as you know, Rob, I really like the Eaters of Light. It was one of my highlights from the last series. I think it's a very lyrical sort of story that suits the Doctor and the first Doctor. I can imagine it's historical. I could imagine him having those interactions. I can imagine Vicky going and meeting all the Roman soldiers and doing the things there. And although it would probably end in a slightly less manic way, I just thought this is a landscape and this is a story and an adventure I can imagine William Hartnell striding through and the dialogue working for him. And I think it's just a really lovely story. And maybe that's why it did resonate so much for me, because maybe it is a very Hartnell-esque story at its core.
I can buy into that. I think that'd be wonderful to see Hartnell in that story.
So where did you put my favourite Doctor?
Dave, I put your favourite Doctor, literally, into the Dalek.
Oh, explain.
Because, Dave, what a wonderful 60s concept miniaturization is. So imagine being miniaturized, and I do know they did that in the Hartnell era, but put that aside. Miniaturization, being inserted into a Dalek, the monster of the 60s. It just seems too good a scenario not to put a really inquisitive Hartnell into. You know, could you imagine Hartnell being miniaturized and put into a Dalek and getting around and having a look? Oh, look at this. You know,
that's a really cool concept. I hadn't thought of it that way, but now you explain it. That's a really cool concept.
Yeah. I mean, there may be some bits later in the episode that are a bit generic and maybe not so Hartnell-y, but the actual, just the concept of being miniaturized, the concept of going into a Dalek, it just seemed so 60s, and I thought Hartnell would just love it, just getting around, having a look around inside his enemy.
I like that. I like
Thank
that
you.
a lot. So Trouton, this was a harder one for me to place, but in the end, I've gone with Trouton in Midnight.
Oh,
because
he can act with his son.
Well, I didn't think of that. Of course. Oh, that's it. I shouldn't pretend. Of course, Rob. Yeah, that was a subtle little reference I was making there. I think the story of Midnight actually portrays all of the various characteristics of the second Doctor, because I can imagine Trouton starting off with that sort of gleeful, I'm going on holiday and I'm going on this adventure to look at this really cool stuff, and clapping his hands and being very excited and fun and interacting with the other passengers and all the rest of it. And then you could get that darker, serious Trouton as the story evolves. And that really sort of almost melancholy Trouton at the end. And I just thought all the things that he does so well are encapsulated in that story.
Okay. I like that, and yes, I can buy into that. And I'm buying into some dark Trouton as well in my choice as well. So I totally get the kind of Trouton you mean there towards the end of the story.
I like dark Trouton, so where have you gone?
I've placed Pat into The Girl Who Waited.
Oh.
Now, this always felt like a 60-ish kind of story to me as well, with the funny garden sets and things, and some of the camera angles and stuff. It felt like a quirky 60s story. Not necessarily a 60s Doctor Who story. I mean more of a, I don't know, The Prisoner or something. There's just something about The Girl Who Waited that felt 60s to me. And I think Pat could be very dark. You know, when the Doctor has to leave Amy behind, or let's say he's leaving Victoria behind, an old version of Victoria. Could you imagine Pat having to make that decision? And he's got the young Victoria on the TARDIS and an old Victoria outside, and, you know, just how dark Pat would be. His face, the lines in his face, the shadows. Oh, his voice would drop down an octave or two, Dave, and he'd be very, very grim.
It's interesting that we've both latched on to that darker portrayal. In my case, not in its entirety, but we've both had that as a bit of a hook into the story for us.
Yeah. Well, that's a more interesting kind of Trouton than, you know, I don't know, skipping around with his recorder. You know, to my mind.
No, I like that. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So Pertwee, this was the very first one that I wrote down.
I'm intrigued.
So I've put Pertwee and Joe Grant into the end of the world.
Yeah. Now, are you thinking of he's taking Joe Grant into space for the first time? That kind of vibe?
I can imagine the Doctor and Joe on their first trip away. He thinks he's got the TARDIS working again, but it's all the Time Lords. And he's sent to this big conference dealing with these weird alien races. He gets to have that melancholy moment where it wouldn't be my planet's been destroyed, but I'm exiled to Earth and I need to accept this. And all of that stuff that goes on, he could be very arrogant and deal with the Lady Cassandra, and Joe could do that investigation and see aliens for the first time. I just thought this was just such a natural fit, and maybe I'm thinking Curse of Peladon in the back of my mind. Maybe this was too easy in that sense, but when I got there, it just felt so right.
Yeah, no, I can go with that. And it's interesting you mentioned Curse of Peladon, because for my Pertwee story, there is an Ice Warrior in it, Dave. I've gone with Cold War.
Oh. You see, I thought when you said Ice Warrior, you're going to go with Empress of Mars, but Cold War, go on.
Cold War. As I say, this was the hardest for me to pick without being really obvious, like doing something like The Hungry Earth or something, which basically felt like a Pertwee story at the time, and saying, oh, well, I put Pertwee in the Pertwee story. But I think here, you know, Pertwee in the Cold War with an Ice Warrior, threat of nuclear missiles flying about, it just seemed a very Pertwee thing to do, and it would get John on a naval vessel. He'd love it. You know, there'd be all sorts of, you know, shenanigans going on, and I just think, yeah, once I hit upon it, I thought Pertwee, Cold War.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. I like that one too.
Okay.
So Tom was one of two I really struggled with. However, in the end, I've actually gone and picked two different stories for two different reasons.
Okay.
So, for the first one, I've put Tom and Sarah Jane Smith into Smile.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
And again, it's that different sort of early Tom, where at the start of a story he could be going through those fields and exploring this deserted space station with Sarah Jane Smith and, you know, making comments about all these funny robots and all that sort of thing, but then getting that grimmer Tom as he works out what's going on. Plus, of course, you get all the stuff with the children, and particularly that young kid. And Tom works so well with those kids that you could just imagine those interactions being really, really good. So I just thought, the more I thought about it, every scene in this story, I could see Tom working in.
Yep, big tick there.
But at the other end of the spectrum, just for a bit of fun, I've put Tom and Lalla Ward's Romana into the Unicorn and the Wasp.
Ah!
Because I could just imagine that as a season 17 story.
Yes. Now we're going to revisit the Unicorn and the Wasp later in this segment.
Oh, okay.
For different reasons. But yeah, so not a snap directly, but yeah, interesting you bring that one up.
So where did you put Tom?
Dave, I've put Tom, and it may seem very obvious, into Mummy on the Orient Express. There's silence.
Yeah, okay.
Now, it may seem obvious with mummies that people think of pyramids of Mars and such, but this was the first episode I can recall where people said, my God, did Tom Baker deliver that line, or did Peter Capaldi deliver that line? There was a particular line in the story where he said it almost exactly like Tom. And it got me thinking how the Doctor acts very Tom-like in it, and conversely how the Tom Doctor would probably go quite well in it too, maybe with Sarah Jane or someone like that. And I thought, yes, I think Tom would absolutely smash Mummy on the Orient Express.
And you know what? I want to change your answer a little bit, Rob. I want to put Leela in there as well.
Oh, okay. And what would she do?
Well, I just think that because a lot of this story is about instinct and trying to work out what's going on and trying to think differently. And Leela was always really interesting when it came down to that. You know, her instincts were always more finely tuned, and she sensed and intuition things that other characters wouldn't. And that could have been a really interesting thing to see here.
Yeah, no, that's interesting too. Okay. Now, best Doctor ever, Davo?
I went with a few combinations on Davo, but then when I landed on the one, it wasn't the obvious story. I don't think it's an obvious story, but it's one that I think would work really well. So I'm putting Davo and Perry into the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm thinking that really season 21 Davo.
Yep.
I'm thinking that Perry going off and exploring and meeting the Ood as probably her first adventure after Planet of Fire would be really intriguing. Her exploring the wonders. I could imagine Davo sort of showing off the black hole and what's going on. But then I can imagine Davo teaming up with someone who isn't his companion, which he did a lot, and going down that rope and visiting the Satan Pit. And I just thought he would be so good with those interactions.
Yeah, no, that would work very, very well.
Yeah, it's not a typical Davo, I don't think, but I think it is a good... where Davo was really good with stories like this.
Oh, he could be so dashing and heroic getting down on that rope and, and that scene where he has to let go of the rope and just fall away into darkness. And, gosh, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm
okay.
that's what I'm very happy with. I'm very, very comfortable with that pick.
Okay. I would put Dave, in Vincent and the Doctor.
Okay. That's a partial step from me. I'm coming back to that story.
Okay, because it's such a sweet, sentimental sort of story. I think Davo just runs away with that kind of acting versus the rest of them. Except maybe McGann. When McGann's in his younger, more Byronic kind of romantic sort of self, maybe he could do it too. But for me, Davo in Vincent and the Doctor, I can just imagine him in the art gallery, with the Bill Nighy talking about, Vincent van Gogh and all that, and, just the look on Davo's face. He'd probably have his hands in his pockets and just beaming at Vincent van Gogh at the time. I just think it'd be really nice. I can picture Davo doing it.
Which is interesting because I've put Colin and Mel into Vincent and the Doctor.
And this is your next one.
And that's my next one. And it's interesting. You've sort of taken a very lovely and soft story and put a lovely and soft Doctor in there. Whereas I've put Colin in there because it is the sort of lovely and soft and dramatic story I think it would have been lovely to see Colin get. And particularly that later Colin with Mel. I would love to see Colin play those more emotional and subtle moments and those sadder moments. I think his interaction with Bill Nighy would be very, very different to what Matt Smith did or to what Davo would have done. He would always have been quite imperious and dismissive of Bill Nighy. That could have been fun as well. But, I can imagine Colin being bombastic with the chicken monster, but then sad Colin at the end of the story. And I think Colin would really have benefited from a story like that actually let him be dramatic, not just bombastic.
Yeah, give him a chance to act, really stretch him a bit, yeah.
Yeah, and Mel, I think, would be the perfect companion for that story because she was such a sweet, bubbly person, and she would be so excited to meet Vincent van Gogh and then so sad, both at the death of the chicken monster and then seeing, what happened to Vincent.
Yeah, Yeah, true. That is an interesting one for me to think about, because I would have never put Colin in that story, but now that I think about it, it's quite an interesting thought to have. Yeah.
Where did you go to with Colin?
I took Colin into dinosaurs on a spaceship.
I wanted to get dinosaurs on a spaceship in there. I almost went for dinosaurs on the spaceship with Trouton, actually.
Interesting. Okay.
Mostly because I could just imagine Trouton doing the dinosaurs on a spaceship. It just seems such a Trouton line. But go on, Colin.
Yeah, I thought, what a wonderfully colourful, bonkers kind of situation for him to be in. He'd get to play off historical figures. Last episode, we were talking about H.G. Wells in Time Lash, and it got me thinking, what about more historical figures like Nefertiti and so on? This could be a lot of fun. And on a spaceship, I started thinking of Terror of the Vervoids for some reason, and how that was a really good story. So maybe I'm thinking of a later Colin Doctor as well, just getting around having this just crazy story, and just doing something fun, whereas a lot of his stuff is just so grim and he's so angry and all that sort of thing. So dinosaurs on a spaceship.
It is interesting there, isn't it, that we've both gone with Colin for trying to find that fun adventure that would actually sort of take him out of, frankly, what a lot of his era wasn't, or what a lot of his era was, and give him something that it wasn't. We've approached it in different ways, but both with the same sort of thought.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I still love Revelation of the Daleks. I think Revelation of the Daleks is his best episode. However, I do like to see the fun stuff as well.
Now, Rob, McCoy took me quite a while to really be happy with. Mm-hmm. But once I landed where I was, I actually became happier and happier with what I've chosen. And I've chosen to put the Seventh Doctor and Ace into Face the Raven.
Oh, with the same ending?
With the same ending. Because when you think about it, McCoy's Doctor is really defined by that manipulative planning ahead. He's always 3 steps ahead, the chess player on multiple boards, all of that sort of thing. And Face the Raven would be exactly that sort of episode where he would think he's doing all that, he's got it all planned, and then Ace goes and does an Ace-like thing, which is do the brave, I'll just take this on and I'll fix the problem and it'll all be sorted. And suddenly the Doctor's manipulation hasn't worked and his planning hasn't worked, and he's got to deal with those consequences. I could see McCoy falling into that trap, and I can see Ace taking that move. In some ways more than I can Clara. I could see Ace just doing the crazy brave thing without really thinking it through and suddenly suffering the consequences.
Well, I was going to jump in there and say Ace wouldn't be smug about it. Because we had Clara just being so smug that I'm like the Doctor, I'm as good as the Doctor, even calling herself the Doctor in one of those earlier episodes. Was it Flatline or something like that? And here, I think Ace would just be more, I'm going to help, I'm going to save things, and then realising that, no, she's going to die, and she'd be like, Professor, do something.
Yeah.
and he can't.
Yeah, and, hang on, I planned this all ahead. It was going to be different. What's going on? And no, this wasn't what I intended. And she said, well, why didn't you tell me? And all of that season 26 stuff that goes on. I just thought that Face the Raven would fit so well into season 26.
No, that's a really good one. That might be my favourite pick of yours so far.
Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with that one. But where have you gone with McCoy?
Dave, I've gone Unicorn and the Wasp.
Oh, this is where you put it.
Yeah, there's something about this that just screams Seventh Doctor to me, out in the countryside, that setting, the way he dresses, the way he'd fit in with the other people at the gathering, the crazy scene where he has to detox from the cyanide, that Tennant does quite a good job of. It's quite comedic, but could you imagine McCoy doing it? Like, could be knocking things off the shelves and he's guzzling things and spitting things out, and he'd be absolutely great doing that physical comedy during the cyanide scene. And just in general, I think meeting a historical figure, a very British historical figure like that, there's something about the late 80s McCoy that I just think, he just fits right in there for me.
Are you going Ace or are you going Mel?
I would go Ace.
Okay. Because when you said it, the image that I got was of that shot of McCoy with his jacket off in that jumper, lying back in the sun, just kind of relaxing in Silver Nemesis.
Yeah. That's the kind of vibe. Yeah.
That's the vibe. I see that. I totally see that vibe. But I did think for a moment that you were going to say Mel, because I could see this is a season 24 story. Like this kind of feels a bit like Delton the Bannerman.
Oh, yeah, because it's got that really fun angle to it that the first McCoy series has. Yeah, I get that. But I think I just like Ace too much. Guilty.
Yeah, no, interesting. They're very different approaches we've taken with the McCoy Doctor. Really different approaches.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which just leaves one guy.
McGann. So I could have been cheeky and just said, well, let's just put McGann into the Day of the Doctor where he should have been all along.
That would have been quite funny and true.
Yes, but look, that's too easy. I've put the McGann Doctor into the Idiot's Lantern.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Because imagine Paul McGann dashing around 50s London, doing the motorbike thing, doing all the stuff with the wire, all the big climaxy stuff, the interaction with Tommy. I just think that's a really sweet tale, but with a dash of action and a dash of adventure. And that, to me, is what McGann is.
Interesting. Okay. I can see that. I can buy that. And I do. For me, this suggestion came from my wife. She came in while I was going through this list and said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm, making this list, and explained it to her. And, she was giving me a shoulder massage and reading over my shoulder. It was quite a pleasant scene, Dave. And then she said, you haven't got McGann yet? I said, no. And she quite likes McGann. She thinks he's fantastic, actually, both in Doctor Who and outside of Doctor Who. And she said, how about Silence in the Library? And I went, oh. And she said, he's romantic and he's losing River Song. He's never met this woman. Imagine the scenes between McGann and River Song. And I thought, oh, now that you say that, I can't not think about that. And suddenly I thought, yeah, you know what? I think that would be a very interesting story for McGann to be into. The Vashta Narada are a good enemy. The romantic scenes with River Song, it just fit for me.
If you were to excise the Donna plot from that story and just make it a real tale between the McGann Doctor and River Song, really focused on that relationship, I agree, that would be a really interesting episode. It might even make me start liking Silence in the Library.
I thought, and again, it's the younger, more Byronic McGann that we're thinking of, not the sweaty, dirty Night of the Doctor McGann. Just there's something about it. I couldn't not see it once you said it, so I didn't really get...
The Byron Doctor in a library, that just makes sense.
Yeah,
that really makes sense. The more and more I think about it, the more that sort of works.
That's right, and his anguish at someone who he clearly is meant to be in love with, but he hasn't met her yet, so the conflict, and then she chains him up and he can't get to her and she zaps herself, and, he would be heartbroken. More so than Tennant, I think. Yeah,
and I also think he would be better than Tennant. Not that I dislike Tennant, but he would be better than Tennant at really conveying a threat that is basically word parallel in that story. You don't see a monster in there, you just see shadows, and there's the threat of a monster and a description of a monster. And I think he would convey that in a really effective manner.
I wonder if it's because of the dialogue work he's done with Big Finish and we concentrate on his voice more. But, I think the way he could describe things and really stretch out some words and, that'd be great.
Well, there's some interesting picks there, and some of them we've gone in the same direction, but a lot of them we've gone in very different directions.
Yeah.
Both from a point of view of having different styles for different doctors, but putting different doctors into the same story, which perhaps suggests that some stories do lend themselves to this more than others. Which brings us to the idea that maybe there are some stories that don't lend themselves to this.
Yes.
Do you want to start with one of your picks, Robert, for a story that you just can't imagine a classic Doctor doing?
Okay. My first pick for this category, Dave, is the Doctor's wife.
Okay. Okay.
Have we got a snap?
No, but it did cross my mind.
All right, because although the TARDIS is the wife to all the Doctors, yes, we get that. I think the way Smithy interacts with Idris seems like a real one-off to me. I can't imagine Well, I can't even imagine other modern doctors doing it, like Capaldi or Eccleston, maybe even Tennant. But certainly, could you imagine Hartnell doing it? No. Trouton? No. Pertwee? No. And so on and so forth. It is so Smithy to me, that story.
Mm. It really is. And I think there's a lot of Matt Smith that actually is very, very unique. It's a very particular time in the series.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's my first pick.
My first pick is Sound of Drums, Last of the Time Lords.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Because to me, this really feels like an ultra-modern story. It's got the pop music references. It's got that use of real-world politicians and news media. It's got aspects of the plot that you just wouldn't do in classic Who with that sort of torture stuff. It's got that big picture sort of thing. It's got the old Doctor. The Master's very different to how he was in the original series. I just think there are bits of it you could put a classic Doctor into, but the whole affair is just so modern and so different to the classic series. I couldn't imagine another Doctor in there.
And you know what it's got, Dave? It's got that Jesus Christ moment where he flies through the air. Could you imagine if they went to Eccleston and said, and in the next scene, Chris, you're going to fly through the air like Jesus Christ? I'm not having that.
Let alone Tom Baker. Could you imagine?
That's Whippet. Yes. Smithy, I can't imagine. Capaldi would be like Eccleston. That is very Tennant, isn't it? Yes. Yes.
Have you got another one for us, Rob?
I do. I have a second and final one, and it's another Smithy story. And that story is The Lodger.
Oh, okay.
Because I think you need a really young, dynamic Doctor for this. And if we're thinking of the classic era, it really only gives us Davo, and he is quite sporting. I could imagine Davo kicking a soccer ball, sort of. He's more of a cricketer to me, in my mind. But just broadly, he still doesn't work. He's not young in the way Smithy is young and sort of zany in this story. I can't imagine Davo going in, because I'm already discounting all the other Doctors instantly, because I don't think they'd fit at all. You imagine Davo in it, Craig's job answering the phones and asking for biscuits, and no, it is just so Smithy. When
you first said it, I thought, well, hang on, you could put Davo in there, but no, you're right. It isn't something you could put a classic Doctor. No, yeah. I totally buy that. You've thought about that more than I did at first, and yeah, of course.
Yeah. What's yours, Dave?
So I've got two more. So the first of them is what I think is kind of the ultimate Smithy story, and that's A Good Man Goes to War, Let's Kill Hitler.
Okay. Yep, fair.
Because that is just so Matt Smith. It is so Moffat. It could only exist at that point in the series history. The characters, I think, are very unlike the classic series. The tone is very unlike other series. That just is... It is the peak Moffat-Smithy era for me. And I don't think it could exist at any other time or in any other way.
How interesting that so far the three stories are all Smithies.
Well, I had one Tennant, but 3 of the 4 have been Smithies, yes.
Yeah.
But my final one's not. My final one's a Capaldi story. Ooh. And that is Listen.
Yeah. Yeah, the even the other New Who Doctors I don't think have the gravitas to pull that off. And for the classics, yeah, I'm quickly running through them in my mind, trying to put them in some of those scenarios or delivering the lines.
Because you need that mix of tension and wonder, but also that very unusual thing of the Doctor remembering the flashbacks to childhood and all that sort of thing. Now, the classic Doctors would never do that, and I don't think the other modern Doctors could pull it off. Eccleston could have done some of the tension and some of the fun, but could he have done that nostalgia? I don't think so. No, it's a really Capaldi unique experience. And Listen is possibly my favourite Capaldi story. What was the penultimate one called? World Enough and Time. World Enough and Time would be competing with it, but Listen's probably my favourite Capaldi story, and it is so Capaldi.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree there. I think you've nailed it.
Well, there you go. We've had some stories that we've had a bit of fun with, and I want to see a few of these now.
Yeah, wouldn't that be good if they could somehow make them? That'd be wonderful.
It will. So we look forward to hearing a few more ideas from what our listeners have to say on this and what they thought of our picks. But we have got a letter and a couple of tweets, Rob.
We do indeed. So what shall we start with, Dave? I can do the tweets if you want to do the letter.
It sounds good to me.
All right. Simon Pittman on Twitter at Library Player says, I'd put 9, as in Eccleston, in the last Christmas special Twice Upon a Time. It would be interesting to see how he'd get on with the First Doctor. You got an opinion on that, Dave?
Well, it's interesting that he substituted a new Doctor for a new Doctor, and Eccleston is so far away now that you can do that. That's my first point. I think that Eccleston and the First Doctor would have actually gone on quite well because they're both very pragmatic, slightly abrupt people. They would either get on very, very well or they would not get on at all. It would be one extreme or the other.
That's true. Very true. Simon goes on to say, I could imagine 7, as in Mccoy, in Day of the Doctor as the War Doctor. I know that's cheating a bit, but I can imagine 7 fighting in the war. And 1, as in Hartnell, in Stolen Earth, just because it would be interesting.
Yeah, that would be yeah, okay. I mean, Hartnell had some great Dalek epics, so I see it fitting there.
Yeah. What about Mccoy as the War Doctor?
I like that a lot. I actually like that a lot, yeah.
Yeah, because he certainly has the personality for it.
Particularly McCoy now, in 2018.
Oh, that'd be very good.
Yeah, I think that would actually work really, really well.
All right, our second tweet is from Uncle Phil, a.k.a. Dr. Philip Basket, at Phil2K on Twitter. He says, 60 is a lock-in for the Pandorica Opens and the Big Bang, the Rings of Akatan, Magician's Apprentice, Witch's Familiar, and Blink. I think he quite likes Colin Baker.
I think so too. I'm just trying to work my way through all those. Pandorica Opens, yes, I could see him having a lot of fun there.
Yeah, he could make that big speech. He could stand up on that rock and shout at the aliens.
Yeah, I could definitely see him doing that. Rings of Akatan. I could definitely see him in the marketplace. I think he'd be really good in that early stuff. He would deliver the...
Then the children start singing, Dave.
Yeah.
And everyone turns off.
I have no doubt Colin would deliver that speech well, but can I imagine his doctor giving a speech rather than bursting in and doing something big and dramatic? I'm not sure. But I can see him in the market scenes at the start. I think he'd be really good there.
Okay, so Magician's Apprentice, which is familiar?
Yeah, that makes sense. The Doctor's slightly loony in that, and Colin could do that well.
I could definitely imagine Colin pulling Davros out of his chair.
Yeah.
And driving it around.
Yeah, that works.
And finally, Blink.
That's interesting because the Doctor's not really in Blink.
Yeah, well, barely.
Barely. And I guess in that sense, why not?
Yeah, it's a pretty easy thing to be on those video links and things.
Yeah. No, some different thoughts there, but yeah, interesting thoughts for Colin, and none that we picked.
No, not at all. Which then leads us to our letter.
So this is from our regular correspondent, Mike Solko. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Mike.
He says, Hiya. This topic should make for a fun discussion. Well, I hope it did.
Yeah.
Here are a few quick hit ideas. First Doctor, Barbara, Ian and Vicky, the end of the world. I'd like to see the Doctor and Vicky in a situation where they are just as out of date as Ian and Barbara were portrayed in futuristic stories.
Interesting. Yeah, okay.
And End of the World could fit as a 60s story really well. It is kind of the web planet in space in some ways.
Yeah, with all the aliens and such.
I like that. Look, I actually think a lot of Doctor combinations would fit into the End of the World. It is a wonderful story that helps to sort of ease people into the new series from the old. It's a lovely little gateway drug there, I think. For the third Doctor and Sarah Jane, Mike says, Time of the Doctor. Imagine the once exiled Doctor now chooses to stay in one place to defend a planet. What a character arc. I love that idea. He's finally got his freedom, can travel anywhere in the universe, and he then chooses, no, I'm actually going to exile myself to this planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really clever idea.
Yeah, good one, Mike.
The fifth Doctor he's putting into Midnight.
Hey, Davo!
the most human of the doctors in a situation where he has to convince others to believe him. Again, Midnight is probably a very classic Who sort of story, and you could see a couple of doctors going in there. I must admit, Rob, I'm sticking with Trouton for that. But yeah, I see why Davo could fit in there.
I can see him getting so exasperated.
Yes.
And sticking his hands in his pockets and deep breathing while he's talking to people.
Doing panty acting.
Yes. You must believe me.
And the Seventh Doctor, Mike says, human nature so they can get the ending right. Okay, kidding aside, he says, the Doctor and Mel in a town called Mercy. McCoy in a Western seems a tremendously fun idea. That, to me, again, is that wonderful season 24, just have fun sort of story. I actually really like a town called Mercy. It's possibly my favourite from that season, in fact. And yeah, I think McCoy and Mel having fun in that would work really, really well.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agreed. So thank you so much for that email, Mike. It was great.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And we look forward to hearing from some other listeners what stories they might mix and match in.
Yes, please. If you've listened to this episode and you have some thoughts, do get in touch. You know where to find us.
Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of our episode, Rob.
It does indeed. Do we have anything to plug?